Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory! Now that the new area of the desert has been released, I feel like I finally have enough information on the Goddess of Flowers to do a video about her. Spoilers for the new Desert World quest obviously, and also a little bit for the Lantern Rite quests. This isn't the first time I've talked about the Goddess of Flowers. When the desert was initially released, I made a video comparing the three god kings of Sumeru, Rukkhadevata, Deshret, and the Goddess of Flowers to the three gods of Guili Assembly, Morax, Guizhong, and Marcosius. The Flower of Paradise Lost artifact set tells us that the Goddess of Flowers was alive when the second who came descended upon Teyvat and waged war on the Primordial One. During this war, a Seelie and human attempted to get married, but apparently Seelies aren't allowed to do that and they got turned into mindless husks of the people they once were. It's heavily implied that the Goddess of Flowers is a Seelie, but despite the other Seelies receiving divine punishment for this attempted marriage, she survived. After the war ended and Celestia was established, the Goddess of Flowers met Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and King Deshret, and the three of them became friends, although she was way closer with Deshret than she was with Rukkhadevata. She and Deshret formed the city of Icannum in the desert. Deshret wanted to advance his civilization outside the rules of Celestia, unaware of the dangers that this choice presented him and his people. But the Goddess of Flowers knew much more than he did and warned him not to seek the forbidden knowledge that would be provided to him by the Primordial One and their four shades. Deshret either didn't care about the consequences of this or didn't fully understand them and remained determined to seek out forbidden knowledge. The Goddess of Flowers accompanied him, knowing that it would eventually cause both of them to die. Although she advised Deshret not to do this, she never explicitly told him that it would kill them both. The Goddess of Flowers died first, and in the Oasis Garden's Morning Weapon Ascension material it says that she died due to the malice of the burning sun and yellow sand, implying that her death was Deshret's fault. However, it's clear from her actions that she planned her own death. Deshret, who was deeply in love with the Goddess of Flowers, never realized her true intentions and descended into madness after she died. The Goddess of Flowers is said to be buried in the Orchard of Pyre Deza, which was created by Deshret as a cemetery for her. The oasis is frozen in time. The water, animals, clouds, and plants are all completely still. My first thought when I saw this place was that this reminds me of Istaroth, the god of time. We first heard about Istaroth all the way back in Mondstadt, where she and Barbatos briefly ruled the country together soon after the Archon War had ended. However, everyone in Mondstadt has completely forgotten about her, and it's almost like she was never there in the first place. The only evidence we have of Istaroth's presence in Mondstadt is the two sundials found on the east coast, one of which is on the Nameless Island. We heard about Istaroth again in Enkanomiya, where she was worshipped as the only god who had not forsaken them until Urabashi showed up. In Before Sun and Moon, the book detailing Enkanomiya's history, there's a chapter called The Parable of the Tree. Unlike most chapters in Before Sun and Moon, the events in this chapter do not appear to be based in reality. The chapter tells us the likely fictional story of a gardener and tree spirit who were in love. The gardener was ordered by the king, who represents the Primordial One, to cut down the tree, but the priest, who represents Istaroth, told the gardener to cut off one of the branches first and replant it. That way the spirit tree wouldn't die. The gardener said that it would take 500 years for the tree to fully grow back, but Istaroth manipulated time and made the tree grow instantly. That way everybody got what they wanted in the end. Obviously this story makes Istaroth look really good, but remember who wrote Before Sun and Moon? An Enkanomian scribe wrote this book. Enkanomians loved Istaroth because until Urabashi arrived, she was the only god that they felt hadn't betrayed them. The parable of the tree cannot be corroborated with physical evidence in Enkanomiya, which makes me think it didn't actually happen in real life. This story is likely a myth made to make Istaroth look good to the people of Enkanomiya who already loved her anyway. This story also highlights Istaroth's perceived affinity for nature. She used her powers to make a tree grow instantly. The Goddess of Flowers obviously has nature-related powers, and for some reason her cemetery is frozen in time. This makes me think that the Goddess of Flowers and Istaroth may be the same person. Istaroth has been largely unaccounted for in Teyvat's history, especially following the Archon War. She was an influential figure in the early developments of both Mondstadt and Enkanomiya, which we now know as Watatsumi Island. So I don't think it's crazy to say that she could have also been influential in Sumeru's development. I mentioned earlier that Deshret wanted to get answers from the Primordial One and their four shades, one of which is Istaroth. Unbeknownst to him, the Goddess of Flowers, who he founded a city with, was Istaroth, one of the four shades he wanted to find. The Goddess of Flowers told Deshret not to go looking for the Primordial One and the four shades and instead provided forbidden knowledge to him herself. I think she had several reasons for doing this. 1, so she could keep her true identity hidden, 2, because the Primordial One is dead, and 3, so she could end her connection to King Deshret and Sumeru as a whole. The first reason is fairly simple. In Before Sun and Moon, we learn that Istaroth's name is not to be spoken aloud or even written properly. We only know her name because the scribe wrote it backwards and only one time. Because she tends to jump around Teyvat a lot and is a shade of the Primordial One, Istaroth may not want her real identity revealed to anybody. If historians from Mondstadt and Watatsumi Island somehow got together and realized that Istaroth had influenced both of their communities and then disappeared for no reason, they get suspicious and question her true intentions. Also, being a shade of the Primordial One, Istaroth is likely incredibly powerful. revealing her identity to just anybody may be a liability. The second reason is a little bit more complicated. The Primordial One is not confirmed to be dead or alive. When the Second Who Came descended upon Teyvat and waged war on the Primordial One and the universal civilization that they created, the world kind of fell apart. At the end of this war, the unknown victor established Celestia. Some people think the Primordial One survived, and some people think the Second Who Came survived. Personally, I think the Second Who Came ended up killing the Primordial One, but their shades, including Istaroth, survived. You can hear more about that in this video, it's linked in the description as well. So I think the Goddess of Flowers / Istaroth warned Destrit against seeking the Primordial One not because she cared about his safety, but because she knew it would be a waste of time. The Primordial One is dead. The third reason is the most complicated and much more upsetting. If Istaroth really is the Goddess of Flowers, which I'm convinced is true, then she did Destrit really dirty. Destrit was enamored with her and probably thought she could do nothing wrong. But the Goddess of Flowers was the one who provided forbidden information to him, which caused the downfall of their shared civilization. In the Flower of Paradise Lost artifact set I mentioned earlier, the Goddess of Flowers tells Destrit that a divine nail will be dropped on his city if he learns the truths of Teyvat. However, as far as we can tell, this never happened. Either she was just wrong, or, and this is what I think happened, she lied. The Goddess of Flowers, being Istaroth, a shade of the Primordial One and one of the oldest entities in Teyvat, had to have known that what she said wasn't true. She would have seen so much more of Teyvat's history and known so much more about the world's laws that I find it highly unlikely that she just got her information wrong. Also, she kind of has the ability to time travel, so surely she could just go into the future and see what would happen. She had to have known what was really going to happen to Destrit when she shared that forbidden knowledge with him. Instead of telling him the true consequences of what he wanted, she lied. She actually ended up telling Destrit about the forbidden knowledge anyway, and I'm sure you know the rest of the story from there. It killed him. However, the Goddess of Flowers actually died before Destrit did. In the Oasis Garden's Truth Weapon Ascension material description, it's implied that the Goddess of Flowers had planned her death and never wanted to tell Destrit her true intentions. Her cause of death is unknown, but the artifact set I mentioned earlier makes it sound like it was Destrit's fault. Obviously, that can't be true if she planned her own death. Maybe she wanted it to look like it was his fault, but at the end of the day, the Goddess of Flowers was 100% responsible for her own death, whatever the cause may have been. Actually, since the Goddess of Flowers is probably Istaroth and we don't know her cause of death, I doubt she's even dead. Istaroth is a really important character who's worked behind the scenes in 3 out of 4 countries so far. I absolutely refuse to believe that she just killed herself for no reason. I think she faked her death so she could move on from the life she was living as the Goddess of Flowers, and unfortunately, Destrit's death was just collateral. As the Goddess of Flowers, Istaroth had become a public figure in Sumeru, so she couldn't just run away from what she built there without explanation. The easy way out would be for her to fake her death. I don't think she ever even cared about Destrit. Obviously, she didn't care enough about him to spare him the horrible death that she caused him to suffer through. I think that Istaroth used Destrit to once again build something into Teyvat, then quickly bail like she was never there. But unlike in Mondstadt and Enkanomiya, Destrit got very attached to her, so it was harder for her to just leave. She might have let him die out of frustration with him. Maybe she just got annoyed that he kept asking for the forbidden knowledge. Either way, Istaroth knowingly caused his death. In Enkanomiya, Istaroth was worshipped as a benevolent yet mysterious deity who disappeared when another god showed up. In Mondstadt, she aided Barbados, an influential archon, with the early development of his nation, but again disappeared. And in Sumeru, Istaroth disguised herself as the Goddess of Flowers, aligned herself with King Destrit, faked her death, and indirectly killed the person who trusted her the most. If you ask me, Istaroth sounds a lot less nice now than she did in the Parable of the Tree. Now the real question is why? Why would Istaroth do all this? I'm not sure if there's an easy answer to that. Sometimes Istaroth is really helpful, and other times she's the opposite. She has no consistent agenda or personality. We barely even know she exists. In videos I made in the past, I said that I think Istaroth is a well-intentioned but misguided god who just wants to see humanity succeed without the gods guiding them. If I'm right about her being the Goddess of Flowers, I still think that holds up. The Goddess of Flowers tells Destrit that the most remarkable beings in the world are humans. The Goddess of Flowers was not directly responsible for harming any of the humans of the desert. Destrit was, albeit accidentally. Maybe the reason she let him die was because she wanted the people of the desert to forge their own paths without their god, who wanted to use divine knowledge to change what they had built. I don't think that Destrit was necessarily out to do anything evil or bad, but Istaroth just didn't like what he had in mind, so she killed him. That sounds terrible to us, but maybe it wouldn't sound so bad to her. And maybe the reason that Istaroth didn't want people to find her is because she doesn't want to receive any more worship from humanity. That's why she faked her death as the Goddess of Flowers and why she disappeared from Enkanomiya and Mondstadt. That's the main part of this theory done, but I'd like to add a quick side note. I don't think it's a coincidence that we got more on the Goddess of Flowers in the same patch where we got to see Guizhong in a cutscene. I've said that I think these two share the same constellation or the same ley line before, and I still think that can be true even if the Goddess of Flowers is Istaroth. Just because she's a shade of the Primordial One doesn't mean that the laws of Teyvat don't apply to her. The primordial one comes from outside of Teyvat, but as far as I can tell, the shades were created within Teyvat. Therefore, they're technically part of this world, so the rules of Teyvat should apply to them. The Goddess of Flowers and Guizhong have nearly identical stories, and they were both heavily featured in the same patch, so that's gotta mean something, right? Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!